Was the Panorama interview Diana's moment of truth? Everyone believed it was. The BBC called it the most important royal interview in history. The palace assumed Diana had finally crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The world watched as the people's princess shattered every rule of royal silence. 23 million people sat glued to their screens that November night. They were all wrong. Before we reveal what really happened that night, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Because what the palace tried to hide about this interview will shock you. Let's get into it. November 20th, 1995, 9 p.m. Living rooms across Britain fell silent. Diana's face filled the screen. Her eyes, lined with heavy kohl, looked directly into the camera with an intensity that made viewers forget to breathe. Her voice was steady but raw, carrying the weight of 13 years of pain. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. The words echoed through 23 million homes. The monarchy trembled. The palace went into lockdown. But that moment, the moment Diana finally told her truth to the world, didn't happen the way they told you. It started 18 months earlier, with a BBC journalist who carried forged bank statements in his briefcase, and a manipulation so sophisticated that it would take 26 years to fully expose. This is the real story of how Diana's most famous words came to exist, the one that destroyed the fairy tale forever. 18 months earlier, 1994, early spring. Kensington Palace sat heavy with silence. The separation from Charles had been announced 2 years prior. The divorce negotiations crawled forward with glacial cruelty. Diana was isolated, surveilled, and running out of allies she could trust. Diana was 32 years old, and she was desperate to tell her story. What the world saw. The people's princess, still smiling at hospital openings, still waving from car windows, still playing the role she'd been given at 19. What was actually happening? A woman trapped in a system designed to silence her, convinced that powerful forces within the establishment were working to discredit her, destroy her reputation, and erase her from royal history. And one of those forces had just made contact with her brother. His name was Martin Bashir. He worked for the BBC's flagship programme, Panorama, and he carried documents that would change everything. Diana didn't know it yet. She couldn't have known, but in 18 months that man would convince her to give the most explosive interview in royal history, based on lies he created himself, and the fairy tale would shatter forever. The Diana you think you know, she doesn't exist. The shy, manipulated victim? Diana had spent 13 years learning to navigate the most ruthless institution in Britain. She knew exactly how the palace machine worked, because she'd been crushed by it repeatedly. The naive princess who married for love. By 1994, Diana had survived bulimia, multiple suicide attempts, her husband's open affair, and a coordinated palace campaign to paint her as unstable. Naive women don't survive that. Strategic ones do, the damsel waiting to be rescued. Diana had already taken control of her public image, cultivated her own media relationships, and learned that her star power was the only weapon the palace couldn't take from her. The real Diana was calculating, media-savvy, and absolutely fearless when cornered. 1989. When the palace tried to limit her charitable work, Diana personally called newspaper editors and ensured her aides' hospital visits dominated the front pages. "They can't stop me from doing good," she told her press secretary. 1992, after Andrew Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story, exposed the reality of her marriage, the palace demanded she deny involvement. Diana refused. She'd secretly cooperated with Morton, and she never apologised for it. 1993. When Charles's authorised biography portrayed him as the wronged husband, Diana didn't issue a statement. She wore a black Christina Stambolian dress to the Serpentine Gallery the same night Charles's documentary aired, and made sure every camera in London was there to photograph her. Revenge dress, revenge timing, perfectly calculated. But here's what made Diana vulnerable. She believed people were inherently good until they proved otherwise. She wanted to trust. She needed to trust. I think the biggest disease this world suffers from is the disease of people feeling unloved, Diana once said. I know that I can give love for a minute, for half an hour, for a day, for a month, but I can give. She wanted to be heard, to be believed, to have her truth acknowledged by a world that had watched her suffer in silence, and Martin Bashir knew exactly how to use that against her. The quality that made Diana the most beloved woman in the world was the same quality that would make her susceptible to one of the most sophisticated manipulations in British media history. She just didn't know it yet. 1994 was the year everything started to converge. Threat 1. Martin Bashir. Bashir had been a relatively unknown BBC journalist, ambitious and hungry for the story that would make his career. He'd spent months researching Diana, studying her isolation, her fears, her desperation to be taken seriously. He wanted an interview with the Princess of Wales, and he was willing to lie to get it. Threat 2. The palace machinery. Behind palace walls, the institution was methodically preparing for Diana's eventual removal from royal life. Plans were being discussed about her title, her security, her role. Courtiers whispered about her mental state, her unstable behaviour, her unsuitability for royal duty. The whisper campaign was working. Diana could feel the walls closing in. Threat 3. Diana's isolation. Diana was increasingly alone. Friends had been warned away by palace pressure. Her family relationships were strained. Charles had Camilla, his friends, the entire establishment. Diana had her sons, her charities, and a growing paranoia that everyone around her reported back to the Queen's private secretary. She was physically safe in Kensington Palace, but she was emotionally drowning. None of these forces knew about the others, but they were all moving toward the same target. In September 1994, Bashir showed Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, forged bank statements. The documents appeared to prove that palace staff and even Spencer's own employees were being paid by security services to spy on Diana. At the same time, the palace was finalising plans to strip Diana of her royal security detail, a move that would leave her vulnerable and isolated. And Diana, desperate for allies, convinced she was being surveilled, terrified of what the establishment would do next, received a call from her brother. "There's a journalist who has proof," Spencer told her. "Proof that they're spying on you." The trap was set. Diana had 4 months before the Panorama interview would be recorded, and she spent that time believing Martin Bashir was the only journalist brave enough to expose the truth. Martin Bashir came to Diana with proof. "I have documents," Bashir told her during their first meeting at Kensington Palace. "Bank statements showing payments to people in your circle. You're being watched. I can help you tell the truth." It sounded credible. It sounded urgent. It sounded like exactly what Diana needed. Diana was being promised 3 things. Promise 1, a platform to tell her story, unedited, unfiltered, and uncensored by the palace. Promise 2, protection through exposure. If the world knew the truth, the palace couldn't silence her anymore. Promise 3, vindication. Proof that she wasn't paranoid, wasn't unstable, wasn't the problem. They were. Diana had reasons to be cautious. She'd been burned before by journalists who twisted her words, by friends who sold stories, by a system that used her honesty against her. But Bashir was different. Or so it seemed. Bashir's manipulation tactics were textbook. He showed her forged documents that confirmed her worst fears. The bank statements looked official, professional, terrifying. They proved what Diana had suspected, that she was under surveillance, that people close to her were being paid to report on her movements. He positioned himself as her only true ally. "The palace will try to stop this," he told her. The BBC might even pull the interview, but I believe you deserve to be heard. He made her feel like they were partners in truth-telling. He gave her complete editorial control. Diana could say anything. Nothing would be cut. Bashir promised her the one thing the palace had never given her, her own voice. "I want to do it," Diana told her private secretary, Patrick Jeffson. "I want people to know the truth." November 5th, 1995, Kensington Palace. Diana sat for the interview. She wore a black suit and heavy eye makeup. The lights were set. The cameras rolled. Diana nodded when Bashir asked his first question. What Diana didn't know, the bank statements Bashir had shown her brother were forgeries. Bashir had paid a graphic designer to create fake documents using stolen letterhead. The BBC's own internal investigation in 1996 would find that Bashir had acted inappropriately, but the findings would be buried for 25 years. Earl Spencer had kept the forged documents and his suspicions about Bashir secret, not wanting to undermine his sister's moment of truth. The promise was a lie. And Diana had just agreed to the most watched royal interview in history, based on fabricated evidence designed to manipulate her fears. 2 weeks until broadcast. The clock was ticking. Diana had seen this before. The palace had been lying to her since 1981. Charles had lied about Camilla. The Queen's private secretary had lied about press briefings. Courtiers had smiled to her face and briefed against her to journalists. The warning signs were there. She just hadn't wanted to see them. But on November 20th, 1995, as she watched herself on television, Diana couldn't ignore it anymore. The moment of realization wouldn't come until much later. That night, watching the broadcast with her sons asleep upstairs, Diana felt vindicated. She'd said the words out loud. The whole world had heard. "There were 3 of us in this marriage." Her voice didn't shake. Her gaze didn't falter. Something changed in Diana's eyes during that interview. The trapped princess who had married at 19 was gone. The woman who played by the palace's rules had disappeared. In her place stood a woman who had just detonated a bomb inside the British monarchy and knew exactly what she'd done. Diana had 2 choices after that interview aired. She could retreat, apologise, try to repair her relationship with the institution, accept whatever scraps of royal life they offered her, or she could stand by every word, refuse to back down, force the palace to acknowledge what everyone now knew. The fairy tale was always a lie. Diana chose truth. "I don't regret doing the interview," she told friends in the days after. Not a word of it. Her preparation for the aftermath was methodical. She called William and Harry into her room and explained what they would hear at school. She wanted them to hear it from her first. She contacted her divorce lawyer and told him to prepare for the final push. If the palace wanted war, she'd give them war. She scheduled more public appearances, more charity work. She would show the world that she was stable, strong, and unbreakable. The palace thought Diana was having a breakdown, that she'd destroyed herself with her honesty. They thought she would crumble under the backlash. They were wrong. Diana was preparing to fight back. November 20th, 1995, 9 p.m. 23 million people in Britain alone turned on their televisions. The atmosphere in newsrooms, palace offices, and living rooms across the country was electric. Everyone knew something historic was about to happen. Diana spoke for 55 minutes. The apparent victory. She told the world about Camilla, about her bulimia, about her marriage being a bit crowded, about wanting to be queen of people's hearts, even if she'd never wear the crown, about the palace's briefings against her, about everything. The reaction was seismic. Supporters flooded the BBC with calls. Diana's approval ratings surged. Women across Britain saw themselves in her story. The betrayed wife, the silenced woman, the person who finally refused to be quiet. The public response was overwhelmingly sympathetic. "She's been through hell," the newspapers declared. "She deserves better." Even the palace, stunned into silence for 48 hours, could barely muster a response. "The Queen is disappointed," was all they could say. The statistics told the story. 23 million viewers in the UK, over 200 million worldwide, the highest-rated documentary in BBC history, front-page news in 137 countries. Diana had broken through the palace's control of the narrative. "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts," Diana said on that broadcast. "Someone's got to go out there and love people and show it." The studio audience, there wasn't one, but the invisible audience of millions, heard a woman reclaiming her voice. For 3 months it seemed like Diana had won. The palace had been exposed. Charles's affair was confirmed in Diana's own words. The world had rallied around her. Diana was vindicated, but what nobody saw coming was already in motion. Queen Elizabeth, in a private letter to both Charles and Diana, wrote 6 words that would change everything. "I want you to divorce. Now." The victory was real, but it wasn't complete. And in 8 months, Diana would lose her HRH title, her royal security, and her official place in the monarchy. The real battle was just beginning. If you're as shocked by this as we were, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because the real story gets even darker from here. Remember November 20th, 1995, 9 p.m, living rooms across Britain? We're back. Diana's face filled the screen. Her eyes, lined with heavy kohl that she'd applied herself in her Kensington Palace bathroom hours earlier, looked directly into the camera with an intensity that would be replayed for decades. Her voice was steady but raw, each word carefully chosen, each pause deliberate. She wore a black Jacques Azaguri suit. She'd chosen it specifically, not navy, which was too royal. Black, serious, final. Behind her, the soft focused background of Kensington Palace blurred into irrelevance. The room held its breath. 23 million people watched Diana Spencer, not the Princess of Wales, but Diana Spencer, tell the truth about the most famous marriage in the world. The words came in waves, measured at first, then building, then crashing over every carefully constructed palace narrative of the past 14 years. There were 3 of us in this marriage. 9 words. Silence. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Buckingham Palace went into emergency session. The Queen's private secretary called an unprecedented midnight meeting. Phone lines between Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace and Kensington Palace burned with frantic calls. The BBC switchboard was overwhelmed. Over 6,000 calls in the first hour alone. Every major newspaper in Britain tore up their front pages and started again. "Diana, I was betrayed. 3 in a marriage. Charles, Camilla and me." But here's what made this moment different from just another royal scandal. Diana hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't consulted palace advisors. She hadn't followed protocol. For the first time in the history of the British monarchy, a member of the royal family had used television to speak directly to the public, over the heads of courtiers, past the filters of the press office, around every single rule in the book. This wasn't just an interview, it was a declaration of independence. 23 million people witnessed this moment, but only Diana herself understood what it truly cost. The human cost. Within weeks she would receive the Queen's letter demanding divorce. The monarchy would strip her of her HRH title, the 3 letters that had defined her adult life. Her royal protection officers would be withdrawn, leaving her vulnerable to the paparazzi who hunted her. She would lose her formal role in the institution she'd served for 15 years. Her office would be shut down, her staff dismissed, her place in the line of royal succession erased. William and Harry would spend Christmas at Sandringham while Diana spent it alone. Diana closed her eyes for just a moment during the interview, gathering herself before the next question. That moment, captured on camera, replayed endlessly, showed the price of truth. So what happened to everyone involved? Martin Bashir. He became the BBC's religion editor. He won awards. He moved to American television and interviewed Michael Jackson. The forged bank statements remained his secret for 25 years, until Earl Spencer came forward with the documents he'd kept, and a 2020 investigation finally exposed the manipulation. The BBC. They launched an internal investigation in 1996 and buried it. The findings that Bashir had acted inappropriately were stamped confidential. BBC executives knew. They protected Bashir anyway. In 2021, Lord Dyson's independent investigation would finally reveal the truth. Bashir had used forged documents. The BBC had covered it up. The corporation issued an apology, 26 years too late. The palace? They used the interview as justification for everything that came next. The divorce, the removal of Diana's title, the withdrawal of security. She brought it on herself, courtiers whispered to journalists. The Queen's letter demanding divorce was sent within weeks of the broadcast. And Diana? Diana lost everything the palace could take from her, except the one thing that mattered, the public's love. In the year and a half between the Panorama interview and her death, Diana's popularity soared even as her royal status crumbled. She was more famous, more beloved, more powerful than ever. But she was also more vulnerable. Without royal security, the paparazzi chased her relentlessly. Without the palace's protection, she was alone. Without the HRH title, she was expendable. In 2020, Lord Dyson's investigation revealed what Diana's brother had known all along. The Dyson report found that Bashir had commissioned forged bank statements, that he'd shown them to Earl Spencer to gain access to Diana, that the BBC had covered up the deception for a quarter century. The BBC fell short of the high standards of integrity and transparency which are its hallmark, Lord Dyson wrote. William issued a statement. It brings indescribable sadness to know that the BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia, and isolation. Harry added, Our mother lost her life because of this. The permanent scar, the Panorama interview was over, the investigation concluded, the apologies issued, but nothing could change what happened on August 31st, 1997. Diana, stripped of royal protection, pursued by paparazzi, died in a Paris tunnel. The interview shaped her final years, the isolation, the vulnerability, the desperation to control her own narrative that made her trust a journalist who'd lied to gain her confidence. Some wounds don't heal, they just become part of the story. So was the Panorama interview Diana's moment of truth? You've seen the evidence. You know what Martin Bashir did. You know what the BBC covered up. And you know what actually happened. The truth is more complicated than a single interview. Diana was manipulated, but she also chose to speak. The interview was built on lies, but Diana's words were her own. Bashir exploited her fears, but Diana's courage was real. I don't go by the rule book, I lead from the heart, not the head, Diana said during that interview. Her legacy in numbers, 23 million viewers that night. Over 200 million worldwide, the most watched documentary in BBC history, but numbers don't tell the whole story. The human element. Diana wanted to be heard, to be believed, to matter on her own terms, not the monarchy's. She got her wish and paid the price for it. In the end, Diana spoke truth to power, and power destroyed her for it. If this story changed what you thought you knew about that night in 1995, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We're uncovering the truth behind every moment the palace tried to hide, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Next time on Diana Untold, Diana lost royal security in 1994. 3 years later, she was gone. The palace said it was routine. The evidence tells a different story. You don't want to miss that. Because the answer to, was the Panorama interview Diana's moment of truth? It was never what the palace told you. The truth was always there. You just had to look.